I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me again today. And we've got another very special guest on today. He's someone who is close to me also personally. And that is because he is the person who helped me get better. He is the person who treated me. He is the person who saw me through some of the most difficult periods of my recovery. He is Dr. Joe Alderete, and he is the Head of Orthopedic Oncology at the Brook Army Medical Center in Texas, San Antonio, Texas. He was the doctor that walked onto the C-17 as I flew in from Germany, looked me in the eyes and said, "We got you. You're going to be fine." And he was with me every step of the way, and he was the man who helped me get home again. And he has treated hundreds and hundreds of veterans who were injured like I was injured in Afghanistan and Iraq. He really is a hero. And I'm just pleased that I've been able to speak to him. Now, I spoke to him for Memorial Day, and this is where that recording comes from. And Dr. Alderete has gone on and retired since then and continues to do amazing things as well. But I'm so glad that he's joined me, that I've spoken to him, and I'm so glad that you're listening today as well. Here he is. I wonder, Doctor, if you could just tell me a bit about yourself, where you come from, and what your role is.
Sure. As the orthopedic oncologist or disastroplasty surgeon for the U.S. Army, I'm one of a couple of specialty trained orthopedic cancer and big trauma surgeons that are specifically employed in order to take care of oncologic resection and reconstruction. But over the many years at war, those of us that do this have also found that we've become extremely good in dealing with what blast injury can do to the human being. I have been at Brook Army Medical Center since finishing my fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in 2009. Before that, I completed a residency in orthopedic surgery at Eisenhower Army Medical Center in Augusta, Georgia. And then prior to medical school at Penn State, and my undergrad was United States Military Academy at West Point.
What brought you into the military? How did you make that decision?
It's funny. I never wanted to do anything since I was 6 years old other than be in the Army. My dad was a B-29 pilot in World War II, and just this amazing man of very silent, selfless servant. Everything he did was, it's funny. He went into medicine after the Army. So I remember nothing of his uniform service other than how he absolutely revered the men and women in the uniform that do something so much higher than self. So I kind of grew up with his mindset in that. And I was a bit of a wild child. So in high school, I got in a little trouble, and it took me a few years to get maturity and headspace right. I really wanted to go to the academy. I was recruited for gymnastics. And after a few years in the Army and at a little smaller military school, I went to West Point in 1993.
At what point did you know you were going to be focusing on oncology or the treatment, say, of blast injuries? And did that only start when the wars began, when Afghanistan and Iraq began, or what was your specialist before that?
No, it was interesting. So I was a resident between 2001 and 2006. So I definitively remember standing in the resident area when the Twin Towers were hit. And I walked into my chairman's office and said, "I'm leaving residency. I'm going to go attempt to go back to the special operations world." And he talked me out of it and just said, "You can do so much better good for those people you love so dearly as a physician." And I had always gravitated toward tumor and trauma because of large exposures, go anywhere in the body. You're dealing with the human organism in extremis, and that physiology always appealed to me. I was in 2003, I was doing a rotation with an orthopedic oncologist who was one of the pioneer orthopedic oncologists. We as a small group of subspecialists were only basically created in the 1960s. So John Eady was an orthopedic oncologist that could go anywhere in the human body and do anything. He was always advocating that as a resident, you were flying higher and farther than the rest of your peers in what you knew. And I saw that he did a great deal of trauma also, just as a secondary, almost as a pastime, because sometimes oncology can wear you out. And so he would do trauma in the peaks and valleys, depending on where he was. And it made him very, very good at it, because from an oncologic standpoint, he could go anywhere from, hair follicles to toenails. That guy was unbelievable. So after a rotation with him, I said, man, I want to be that guy.
And so were you in Afghanistan or Iraq at any point yourself?
I was. So 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq and Baghdad, and then a smattering of other stuff along the way.
Talk to me then about Brook Army Medical Center and CFI and the patients who for the last 20 years you have seen come in and what that experience was like, and I suppose the variety of patients as well and what you were focused on.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I got there in 2009, just taking a back step, between 2001 and 2006-07, and then 2008 and following, there are some very specific tiers of the evacuation posture between Iraq and Afghanistan. There was different ways in which we fought the war and then intook casualties. Brook Army Medical Center is very unique in that it is one of the what we call big med-cents or university-like military treatment facilities. Brook is the only level 1 trauma center in the Department of Defense right now. Previous Wilford Hall Air Force Medical Center was this giant beacon really right down the road, and also intook casualty as a level 1 trauma center and evacuation hub where patients would come to the local area and experience both reconstruction and rehabilitation. Intrepid was created as a sister building within the Brook Army Medical Center complex, essentially started in its inception in development in 2006 and then stood up in 2007 as part of the campus of Brook Army Medical Center, where we also have the Army's Institute of Surgical Research, where blast injury is studied. Part of that complex or adjunct annex, if you were, is also the U.S. Army's Burn Center, where patients are evacuated on burn flight and our critical care intensive care teams, the CCAT teams, in an effort to grab a extreme burn from anywhere in the world and bring them to a center of excellence. And so this entire campus is basically dedicated to the human organism in its extremes of trauma or burn. Intrepid itself is a tiered advanced rehabilitation center that was originally created because the picture in American society of blast injury was the amputee. And then we saw as time went on that the limb salvage cohort of patients also deserved the same degree of intellectual attention and subject matter expertise in reconstruction. So Joe Shue, one of my former partners, started the limb salvage arm of rehabilitation and reconstruction as a partnership. The two together have created Intrepid as this unbelievable asset for the surgeon in rehabilitation because, depending on who you listen to, what we do from a reconstructive standpoint, as you know very well, is probably only about 20 to 30% of what the patient gets well with or becomes whole with. Everything else is rehab, and what our therapists do, our sports psychologists, the chaplain, the entire team that goes into getting patient from broken as they come through the door to whole again as they leave. So it's really a unique place. We have two sister facilities in Walter Reed and National Naval San Diego. Beautiful, beautiful assets in the military medical program as well. Each have their own identity. Intrepid and BAMC and ISR focus primarily or are centered around combat trauma.
More of our conversation right after this. So I suppose then when you saw me, when I arrived, this must have been like dozens, hundreds of other people that you have seen coming in. And so talk to me a little bit about my own case, what you first heard, how you would prepare for that, and what process you will go through.
It was funny. As we were preparing for your evacuation back, both from Poland to Landstuhl, and then most specifically, as you were caught by my colleagues at Landstuhl, and I could see pictures of your injuries and guide our teams at Landstuhl. Landstuhl is a very unique environment where patients are received from theater hospitals, and sometimes in the first opportunity for trauma teams that are not in the extremis of combat casualty care, taking care of patients in a university-esque setting. So where they're able to first say, okay, this is really what Benji is dealing with, in spite of or sometimes in parallel to the reports that we received. And then his care was very good along the way, and expert level evacuation really began to coalesce around surgeons that are able to summarize and picture what your spectrum was. So long before you left Landstuhl, Kyle Potter and I were aware of the constellation of events that were your injuries and could plan out where you would be best suited to be evacuated to. I think we're the two last orthopedic oncologists on active duty blast injury disasterplasty surgeons that were interns when the Twin Towers were struck. So a fair amount of experience along the way. We both do a great deal of amputee care, and so have kind of a niche understanding of blast injury and what it takes to get people well afterwards. Kyle is a dear friend and advocate also for the patient, certainly in a non-selfish environment where we basically talked about what would be necessary to get someone with your constellation of injuries well again and back to Fox. And we landed on BAMC in an effort to help you, one, get in the burn surgery algorithm, because that kind of trumped everything despite what he and I could do from a reconstructive standpoint. So that was the ace in the pocket that when played brought you here to us. And as we prepared
and that you have to look at, you've got a whole lot of different kind of injuries, from burns to eye loss to eyesight loss to limb loss, and you have to then somehow try and balance those and figure out which is the priority to treat. And so when you looked at me, how did you come to the conclusion that burns were the primary thing to look at?
from understanding while you were still in Germany, burns, of various degrees can often be source of massive moisture loss, the constellation of events that can be multi-organ system failure can creep up very quickly. Burn injury in the face of blast can be absolutely deadly. So if the burn injury adds all together to be a significant burden, then the burn trumps everything else. And we lean forward into expert burn and evacuation care, because that very quickly can be a disaster.
I remember when I landed down at Bamsey, and you were there, you were on the runway, you were waiting to come on board, and I was still on the plane. You came straight in, and before I'd even been moved, you were looking at me, you were looking at my injuries. But what's going through your mind at that point? What are you looking for then and there?
It was funny. Jennifer Gurney and I, who was the trauma burn surgeon that joined me, or I actually joined her in meeting the burn flight. We have so many great nurses and flight docs that you didn't need two surgeons out on the runway. But it is so absolutely important to understand, as we start to place assets around you in the first several days, that she and I were deployed together in Kabul in 2015-16, and in many cases would go out and meet the flights, both as a show of force, a courtesy to the patient that says immediately, I've got you. You're not just another, hurt individual. You have a name, and we look at each other in the eyes and we say, this is your first meeting with the team that you will be with probably every day for the next several months.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt as well. And I remember that flight over was one of the worst parts of everything for me, strapped down on that C-17, and I was at a point. And then when you came on board and, you looked me in the eyes and you just said, we've got you now, you're going to be fine. There was this absolute moment where I realized for the first time in days that I was kind of safe. I was there. I was with people who knew what they were doing, and just watching how precise you were and how you operated gives so much back, to the patient. So you understand that then. I guess you're not only is it the physical, you're understanding what that does to the patient mentally and to will them on.
Absolutely. So much of this process of getting better and surviving massive injury is hope. And it is so much the relationship between, you and Alicia Williams, and you and Jennifer Gurney in your intensive care, and you and myself in, taking you to the operating room every day to whittle on your extremities and get you one inch better, one little bit better every day, requires a great deal of faith. And to do that, the look you in the eye after, in my cancer patients, to say, something that they have related to me over the last 20 years has been, you gave me this massive diagnosis of cancer, and then with a very tearful eye, you said, I'm there with you. We're going to walk this all the way. And started to do that after an experience in Eastern Afghanistan that has followed, in 2012-13 timeframe, and has followed me my entire career, which is, when you can and you're not overwhelmed, meet the patients immediately as they get off the bird. You look people in the eye and you say, brother, sister, you're in my care now. I got you.
Yeah. You must sometimes, though, meet many patients for whom it's very difficult to pick them up and will them on and give them that inspiration. I mean, how difficult is that? And, when you have to do that?
It's incredibly difficult. One of the things that we are starting to understand in this universe of rehabilitation and orthopedic reconstruction and human performance is just what the resiliency factor behind somebody's eyes is, because they all we come to American uniformed service or British uniformed service, Australian uniformed service in so many different ways within society that we come with very different backgrounds. You never know what somebody's home life was and why they joined the military. And so they have such a spectrum of resilience. When the bomb goes off, that's minute one. And so sometimes people look at you in this horrified, I know I'm going to die, and trying to convince somebody that they're not, even in some cases when they can't cognitively hear you. They have an endotracheal tube in their mouth and they're being sedated to such a degree that they can't quite understand or respond. But I have had so many people that tell me, I remember your voice and what it meant when they tell me of my first minutes in the intensive care units, that there's something indelibly imprinted on the human brain of voice and another human being, and not the machines, just the effect to the human being. And that's that resiliency factor that you talk about so much, that was your, like, I have got to get up. You heard your daughter's voice and I'm going to will myself on. To have an advocate with you in that, we're going to will Benji back to wellness is massive.
Yeah, I mean, I saw with my own eyes how, I became more than just another patient to you and to everyone else. That when we come there, we become, in a sense, part of you, and our recovery is your recovery. And, I always knew that going through this, it wasn't just about me getting better. It was about doing it for you guys as well, because it just felt so wrong to not be trying hard when you guys were trying so hard. And so everyone inspires everyone. And that's, I think, what made it so amazing is that once you're on a team like that and you don't want to let other people down. And I think the same is true in the Army in general. You are on a team and you have to go through it absolutely together, step by step. And then so it must be quite very emotional for you then to see people go home as well then, because how did that make you feel? You've reached your goal, right? You've achieved what you wanted to achieve.
It is the most amazing moment. Most of my patients will send me their graduation days, like you did, getting on that plane, and most of the time it's a moment where I have to sit down. And I'm like so happy and a little tearful and sad to see people go, because we have spent so much time together in the extremis of rehabilitation after reconstruction and blast injury, that you're happy and you're sad. You're happy for their families, as a God-fearing individual. That to me is one of those moments where you look up and you say thanks, because it is it's human. It is like the essence of I get knocked down and I brush myself off, sometimes in a lot of blood, and I get up and I go do great stuff. And so those are, man, those are the graduation moments that just blow me away. I mean, they are so, so, so amazing in what they give back. And selfishly, we as surgeons that are not involved in rehabilitation processes, and when I handed over Intrepid Surgical Directorship a couple of years ago and became just the senior consultant, the old guy with the gray hair that has done this a lot.
Not true, doctor.
The sadness but elation that I felt in giving the baton to another individual that would take over and continue what you've started with as a surgeon, leaning into the rehabilitation world and programming for your therapist, guiding, watching what we did. And, like there are many times I would sit and I would watch you walk and then watch you run. And selfishly, that helps me become a better surgeon, but also helps me tweak the therapy world in a way that makes you better, but is still safe for your reconstruction. So I can't imagine not doing this. I mean, it blows me away.
You look back at the last sort of 20 years, there must have been huge changes because of the, Afghanistan and Iraq. You must have seen huge advancements, both in prosthetics, but also in the very surgery. I mean, did you see just a huge change and a huge investment and huge progress over those years?
Absolutely. It's unfortunate, as you look at the military industrial complex over 100 plus years, you see, technological advancements in blood product implication, in infection prevention and treatment, in surgical critical care, burn. There are so many ways where, unfortunately, the interaction between a bomb and a human being drives advance. We have seen so much in those cohorts of 2001 to 2006, 7-ish, and then the dismounted blast injury cohort of patients between 2008 and 2012 to 14, depending on kind of who you were reading and what major units you were looking at. But those things have so shaped the medical experience that now pours into civilian communities all over the United States. So even to such a degree that we kid around with becoming, disaster plasty surgeons, but the kind of amalgam or the molding between adult reconstruction and trauma and orthopedic oncology and burn. I always kid around that I'm kind of a closet general surgeon, critical care follower, or an individual that loves what my general surgery critical care counterparts do, because I like to geek out at your bedside and sit around and look at your numbers and try to make them better, even as an orthopedic surgeon. And there are many of us that shy away from that. So just the creation of the individual from a surgical standpoint that deals in their specialties primarily with the worst of the worst was another technological advancement. And so you find that bleed into middle America now all over the place, where because of people that get in trouble in high-speed accidents, on highways, industrial accidents, burn and blast injury in South Texas that looks very much like a bomb because of industrial exposure, that we're well suited to take care of these injuries. And as many of us leave active duty service, we spill out into the communities and hopefully still bring that level of expertise to folk that may never have seen somebody that, looked like Benji Hall.
Yeah. I suppose then it's also worrying looking forward, because the budgets are all drying up now. And so is there a concern that some of this progress will now slow down or stop?
Yeah, there's significant concern. In fact, it scares me to death. The idea of military readiness now is a bit scary, as many of us leave the experience. So many, I say somewhat facetiously, somewhat not. I have always been a combat surgeon. I spent my entire career deploying and taking care of blast injury patients, besides my oncologic patients. So as many of us lose that identity in a good way, because we're slipping away from war, the military healthcare system can be a very difficult marriage a difficult bride or groom, if you will, in that it can be frustrating to take care of people because of systemic constraints. We're always battling the needs of the mission and the needs of the individual. Those become very different when we're not at war. And the budgetary constraints now are such that the Defense Health Agency has come into the field. We're all trying to understand that. They're all very well-intended people. Unfortunately, some somewhat divorced from the day-to-day care of the patient. So we're all trying to figure out what our spectrum or what our day job is going to be like over the next 10 years of reconstructing what we did. We know we can't spend money in military healthcare the way we did, and we want to be good stewards of the American dollar or the British dollar. However, we also know we have a job to do, which is stay ready and not be where we were September 10th, 2001, which that's an animal that scares me to death. We've learned a lot. We can't go back to where we were.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes. So what's then the best way? I mean, if you had to think of the best way that they could keep this military medicine readiness, keep the doctors trained in these injuries when you're not seeing some of these injuries nowadays, what is the best kind of system that could perhaps be put in place to continue this incredible level and to continue improving this level?
I think we have to keep the lights on in these Camelot institutions like Brook Army, Walter Reed, National Naval San Diego. We're going to have to entertain the very, very hard and gut-felt budgetary cuts that may cause some of the smaller medical centers to go away. We very much probably need to look into keeping the historical experience and intellectual competence at just a few massive centers where we continue to train residents and medical students and nurses and medics, but that we kind of, like the Marine Corps, are akin to, say, a few good men and women. And in doing that, at a place that's also a level 1 trauma center, we continue the numbers that are necessary to keep the historical experience within the battle force.
But is that about bringing in more private patients? Is that about bringing in, say, patients from Ukraine? Like, how do you continue a level of training with these kind of injuries when, thankfully, U.S. soldiers aren't being injured in this way anymore?
100%, Benji. One of the reasons why BAMC exists as a platform is to continue those numbers in the military-civilian relationships. So that military-civilian, what is the Secretary of the Army designation, or in your case, Secretary of Defense designation, that allowed us to take care of you, is an agreement between the government and these trauma centers that allow us to reach into the civilian population in what looks like blast injury. Now, that can be oncologic resection and reconstruction, because sometimes what we do to people in the face of cancer is very similar to what happens in the face of blast injury. It can be after massive sports injury that we have seen of professional sports, where those constellation of events that, I keep talking about look a great deal like the human being that has been hurt in war. We also think about the individual that has been hurt in other countries, like our Ukrainian colleagues. And those folk, because they've been exposed to blast, would be great folk to continue to learn from as we take care of and keep the historical experience. There's also great ways in the reaching out to the Ukrainian population and in being able to do what we said we were going to do as allies, which, if we can't be there from a significant troop population, then we can take care of the people that we said we were going to ally to. So those folk, as many cohorts of patients that we could continue this military-civilian relationship with and keep the lights on, keep the historical experience. There's still many of us that leave military service into the communities. And so as we do that, continuing the education efforts for, okay, what is necessary to take care of a blast-injured patient? How do we teach that? Chris Renninger, one of my colleagues from the Navy, who was down in San Antonio last week, as we teach a course together, we were talking about this very thing, which is, how do we keep the lights on? You know, they don't need to be as bright as they did 10 years ago, but they still have to be at low ember in order for us to keep this experience that allows us to dust things off and take care of people in expertise.
When you look at everything and you look at your job, you look at BAMC, you look at these injuries, is there anything else you want to say about them that really stands out for you? Something that's really important that people need to know about what you guys do?
Benji, thank you. We, my own dealing with the next 3 months of transition of active duty service has been kind of a consolidation of, why I did what I did in the beginning, and what has been so gratifying has been just the taking care of some of the most deserved, selfless, brave individuals on the planet. And man, that's been a gift. I'm going to miss that so dearly. Not that everyone else in our civilian experience is not just as deserved, but the look of brother and sister in arms between physician and patient is very much like the look that you and I shared, which is, thank you for this transmission of hope, and we're going to get better together. And this team that is missing so much in civilian relationships, because we are under the constraints of an insurance system. We have to churn through so many patients in order to get through a day. You have the rest of your world that is leaning in on you. The great thing about this experience is it is all digested to the relationship between you and I want to see you get better. And that is the American, or any, uniformed physician and surgeon, is just this wonderful relationship.
It's amazing to think. I was going to ask of all the benefits and how military medicine really stands out from private medicine, and the benefits that you have. And that's it right there, is that you are in some ways not constrained by many of the things that you might be in the private medical world. Is that right?
Yes, sir. We try to be good stewards of the military healthcare dollar, but I have never been asked, sometimes in extremely, extremely expensive reconstructions, to get people back to the levels that they want to be at. I've never been asked to justify my healthcare expenditure. I have never been asked, I kid around with one of my former commanders and now mentors, who was also a burn surgeon, Evan Renz, and also one of the very few commanders that through a 30-hour reconstruction would check on the team. I never was asked, hey, Joe, why are you doing this? It was, I know you need to keep that experience. There's a human being on the other side of this table, and I don't care what garbage is in the background. You do what you do. And that is amazing. It is very rare, and it is a unity of effort that this environment is so good at. I mean, we're bad in military healthcare at a lot of things. I mean, if the numbers are so significant, things get clogged up in the sieves. I mean, there's things that we could do better. But in putting an expert team to the benefit of an individual on the bed, man, we rocked a house at doing that.
Yeah. I feel what you've talked about today. I feel that incredible privilege to have been with you and to be treated by you and to become part of your family. And it will forever be one of my life's great memories. And I know that sounds strange to say it because some people think it was the worst time of my life, but it was honestly the best time of my life. You know, what we did working together to get to one place, it was an absolute honor and a joy every single day to get up and work together. And maybe for the first time ever, it gave me a small glimpse of what it was like to be in the Army, and I was absolutely floored by it. And so, like, a big hug from me to all of you guys, and I can't wait to see you in person soon.
Benji, you will always be part of the family, my brother. Absolutely.
Hey, thanks very much, brother.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. And I think it's also worth saying that there are countless amazing doctors out there, other doctors who treated me, but sometimes you find someone like Dr. Alderete who is a real leader. And I knew and saw that every other doctor at the Brook Army Medical Center looked to him, how he helped guide the way. And he really has done so much in helping the next generation of military doctors, military nurses, physios, all these experts really prepare for what might come in the future. So it's because of Dr. Alderete that I got home, that I can walk again, that my prosthetics worked, that I healed well. But it's also because of him that the future of military medicine is as safe and in such a good place as it currently is. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll speak to you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.